A distress signal is a plea for salvation. But when a desperate alien world broadcast their final cry into the cosmic void, they didn't reach angels. They reached Sector 4. They reached Earth. And the hyper-predators of a Class 9 death world didn't send a rescue team. They sent a Warfleet. The orbital defense grid of Aethelgard was burning. High Chancellor Gideon watched from the subterranean command bunker as the tactical holomap shifted from a resilient blue to a suffocating terminal red. The Krell Empire had breached the inner system. Their sleek, crescent-shaped dreadnoughts were systematically glassing the outer colonies, leaving nothing but slag and ash in their wake. "Shield integrity at 12%, reported Commander Haxon, his voice tight with an emotion he was desperately trying to suppress. Though alien in their biology, with their elongated limbs, pale violet skin, and secondary respiratory gills, their translation matrix flawlessly converted their panic into standard Terran syntax for the eventual historical record. The Krell Vanguard is entering high orbit. They are not offering terms of surrender, Chancellor. They are preparing the planetary bombardiers. Gideon closed his eyes. The Aethelgardian Concordat had been a peaceful coalition of artisans, philosophers, and traders. They had never invested in weapons of mass destruction. Their hulls were built for solar windsurfing, not absorbing plasma torpedoes. The Krell, a biomechanized race of conquerors, saw their pacifism not as a virtue but as an invitation. "Is the tachyon array still functional?" Gideon asked, his voice barely a whisper in the echoing chamber. "Barely, sir," Haxon replied, his multi-jointed fingers dancing across the crystalline interface. "But the galactic core relay is down. The Krell severed our comms buoy. We cannot reach the High Council. We are completely isolated." "Then we don't aim for the core," Gideon said, stepping up to the console. He looked at the vast, dark emptiness of the galactic map. "Aim the array outward, toward the periphery." Haxon froze. "The periphery? Chancellor, there is nothing out there but the quarantine zone, Sector 4. The galactic databases explicitly forbid broadcasting into that void. The worlds out there are geologically unstable, hyper-violent death worlds. Nothing civilized could possibly survive there. If we die today, our civilization ends anyway," Gideon said grimly. "If there's any intelligence out there, maybe they will hear us. Maybe they will remember us. Transmit the complete cultural archive, our coordinates, and a Class 1 distress SOS broad channel. Maximum yield." Haxon hesitated for only a fraction of a second before engaging the sequence. Deep beneath the planet's surface, a massive geothermal reactor dumped its entire payload into the tachyon transmitter. An invisible, faster-than-light pulse of data shot outward, bypassing the Creel blockade, screaming into the silent abyss of Sector 4. 300 light-years away, in the year 2145, Dr. Henrietta Collins was nursing her 4th cup of synth caf. She was stationed at the Armstrong Deep Space Listening Post on the dark side of the Moon. The facility was a joint venture, primarily funded and operated by the massive defense conglomerate that had formed from the merger of SpaceX, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon. Humanity had clawed its way back from the brink. The late 21st century had almost broken them. Climate collapse, resource wars, and localized nuclear exchanges. But survival was etched into human DNA. They had united under the United Nations Space Command, turning their aggressive, hyper-competitive nature outward. For 80 years they had built, fortified, and armed their solar system, waiting for the day they would meet their neighbours. They expected monsters. They built weapons to kill gods. Henrietta was adjusting the frequencies on the Raytheon subspace parabolic scanners when the main console lit up like a Christmas tree. The klaxons didn't just blare. They screamed. The sheer volume of data slamming into the SpaceX Lockheed servers nearly caused a localized blackout. "What the hell?" Henrietta muttered, her heart slamming against her ribs. She tapped furiously on the glass interface. "Diagnostic. Did we just catch a solar flare?" "Negative," the facility's AI purred. "Tachyon burst detected. Origin point, extrasolar. Decoding structural algorithm." Henrietta watched in stunned silence as the screens populated. It wasn't static. It was math. complex, beautiful, terrified math. The AI chewed through the encryption, using decades of theoretical xenolinguistics DARPA had funded just for this exact impossible scenario. Warning: Class 1 distress signal. Audio files, video logs, and mathematical translations flooded the room. Henrietta saw images of cities burning. She saw sleek, crescent ships raining fire down on desperate fleeing civilians. She saw the pale, violet-skinned aliens begging for intervention, pleading with the cold universe for someone, anyone, to save them from extinction. She slammed her hand down on the red emergency comms button. "Central Command, this is Armstrong Station," Henrietta said, her voice shaking but her training kicking in. "Priority 1, Code Black. I repeat, Code Black. We have confirmed extraterrestrial contact." "Armstrong, this is General Richard." The gruff voice of the Earthside commander crackled through the comms. "Confirm Code Black. Are we under attack?" "No, sir," Henrietta said, pulling up the translation of the coordinates. "But someone else is, and they just gave us their exact address." The emergency session of the United Nations Defense Council in Geneva was a storm of shouting diplomats, grim-faced generals, and calculating corporate executives. The holographic projection of the Aethelgardian distress call looped in the center of the vast circular room, casting an eerie violet light over the assembly. Admiral Arthur Mitchell stood at the head of the tactical table, his arms crossed over his pristine black and silver uniform. Mitchell was a veteran of the Jovian separatist wars, a man who understood that space was not an ocean of romance, but a frozen desert of logistics and lethality. "The translation is complete," General Richard announced, pacing the floor. "They call themselves the Concordat. The aggressors are the Krell Empire. Based on the telemetry embedded in the distress signal, the Krell weapons technology relies heavily on directed plasma and energy shielding. Their ships are elegant, symmetrical, fragile." "Are we actually considering this?" asked Secretary Ford, the representative from the North American bloc. "We have spent the last century fortifying Seoul. Our directive was isolation and defense. If we send a fleet out there, we reveal our existence to a hostile galactic empire." "Secretary Ford," Admiral Mitchell finally spoke, his voice carrying the heavy, gravelly weight of absolute authority. "Look at those Krell ships. Look at how they systematically burn civilian centers. They are an expansionist, genocidal empire. If they finish off this Concordat, how long until their scouts wander into Sector 4? How long until they find Earth?" Mitchell leaned over the table, glaring at the politicians. "We have spent 150 years and trillions of dollars turning our solar system into a fortress. We have the United Launch Alliance dry docks churning out dreadnoughts that have never fired a shot in anger. We have Raytheon kinetic kill vehicles gathering dust. If there is a predator empire in our galaxy, I say we do not wait for them to come to our house. I say we go to theirs and we break their teeth." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The CEO of the SpaceX Lockheed conglomerate, a sharp-eyed woman named Elizabeth, nodded slowly. "Admiral Mitchell is right. A defensive war is a losing war. Furthermore, this Concordat just handed us a golden opportunity. If we intervene, we save their species. We gain an instant indebted ally with deep knowledge of galactic geography and Krell technology. It is a strategic imperative." President Arthur Haxon of the Global Assembly stood up. He looked at the looping footage of the burning alien world. He thought of Earth's own bloody history, of the atrocities humans had committed against each other, and the hard-won peace they now held. "Admiral Mitchell," the President said softly, "what is the status of the First Sol Fleet?" Mitchell's eyes gleamed with a cold, predatory light. "The First, Third, and Fifth Fleets are fueled and at Condition 1. We have 12 Prometheus-class dreadnoughts, 80 Ares-class destroyers, and 200 heavily armoured frigate escorts, all equipped with the new Alcubierre slipspace drives. We can be at their coordinates in exactly 48 hours. "You're authorizing a first strike capability on an unknown alien species," Ford whispered, horrified. "No," Mitchell replied. "I am authorizing a rescue mission. The first strike is just a byproduct." President Haxon slammed his gavel. Authorization granted, Admiral. May God have mercy on the Krell, because humanity won't. Within hours, the Sol system changed. The orbital shipyards above Mars and Earth lit up like newborn stars as massive fusion engines ignited. To the rest of the galaxy, starships were works of art. They were aerodynamic, swept back, glowing with elegant energy lines. But human starships were not art. They were brutalist geometry. They were massive, blocky rectangles and harsh angles, built from feet-thick layers of tungsten, titanium and carbon nanotube armor. They didn't glow. They were painted matte black to absorb radar and light. They looked exactly like what they were, floating guns. Aboard the flagship UNSC Leviathan, Admiral Mitchell stood on the command bridge. The bridge was not exposed at the front of the ship behind a glass window like the alien vessels. It was buried dead in the center of the dreadnought, surrounded by 50 meters of solid armor. Slipspace drive spinning up, his helmsman Lieutenant Ford reported. Target coordinates locked. The alien array is still broadcasting a weak signal, but the planet's atmospheric integrity is failing. They don't have much time. Mitchell looked at the tactical map. Attention all vessels. This is Admiral Mitchell. In 3 minutes, humanity takes its first step onto the galactic stage. We are answering a call for help, but make no mistake, we are bringing the apocalypse with us. Spin up the railguns. Prime the nuclear-pumped lasers. Let's introduce these bastards to the children of Earth. Slipspace rupture in 3, 2, 1, mark. Space tore open. The massive, brutal armada of Earth plunged into the dimensional rift, leaving the solar system behind. The sleeping giant had awoken, and it was hungry. Back on Aethelgard, the end had come. Chancellor Gideon stood on the balcony of the Grand Citadel, the highest point in the capital city. The sky above, once a beautiful, serene violet, was now choked with black ash and the burning red trails of falling debris. The Krell Armada hung in the sky like the swords of gods. 300 crescent-shaped destroyers blotted out the sun. Their energy shields shimmered with a sickly green luminescence. "Shield grid is down," Commander Haxon said over the comms, his voice finally breaking. "They are charging the primary plasma bombardiers. Chancellor, it has been an honor." Gideon closed his eyes, listening to the terrified wails of the millions of civilians sheltered below the citadel. "The honor was mine, Haxon. May the ancestors grant us peace." High above the planet, the Krell fleet commander, an arrogant warlord named Vorek, lounged in his command throne. "Pathetic," Vorek sneered, watching the energy signatures of the Aethelgardian defences wink out one by one. These herbivores didn't even put up a fight. Charge the main batteries, burn the capital to the bedrock, leave no survivors, let the galaxy know what happens when you deny the Krell Empire. The green plasma cannons on the Krell dreadnoughts began to glow with blinding intensity. The air ionized. The execution was seconds away. Then, the universe screamed. It wasn't a sound, but a violent gravitational shock wave that rippled through space itself. Every Krell sensor array went instantly blind, overwhelmed by a massive burst of exotic radiation. "Report!" Vorek barked, gripping his throne as his massive dreadnought shuddered violently. "Did they detonate a core?" "Negative, Supreme Commander," a panicked Krell technician shouted. "We have a spatial rupture directly off our port bow. It's massive, sir, it's—" Space shattered like glass. Out of the dimensional tear, a behemoth emerged. It was completely black, a monstrous slab of angular metal that dwarfed the Krell dreadnoughts. It had no glowing fins, no elegant curves. It was 3 kilometers of pure, unadulterated violence. The words UNSC Leviathan were painted in stark, grim white across its armored prow. And it wasn't alone. Space tore open again, and again, and again. Dozens, then hundreds of slipspace ruptures bloomed across Aethelgard's high orbit. The human fleet poured into real space with terrifying precision, instantly surrounding the Krell Armada. Down on the planet, Gideon opened his eyes. The green glow of the Krell cannons had vanished, overshadowed by an artificial eclipse. The sky had turned pitch black, filled with blocky, terrifying monoliths that seemed to absorb the light itself. "Haxon," Gideon breathed, staring upward in sheer disbelief. What is that?" I don't know," Haxon stammered over the radio. "They don't match any known galactic registry. By the Maker, Chancellor, the mass readings on those ships are impossible. They should collapse under their own gravity." On the Leviathan, Admiral Mitchell looked at the holographic display of the Krell fleet. "They have powered weapons aimed at the surface," Lieutenant Ford reported. "They are holding position, trying to realign their shields toward us." "Open a broadband channel to the Krell flagship," Mitchell ordered, his voice cold. Aboard the Krell dreadnought, Vorek glared at the main screen as it was forcibly hijacked. The static cleared, revealing the face of a creature he had never seen before. A bipedal, forward-facing predator with flat teeth, a pale complexion, and eyes that held absolutely zero hesitation. "Attention Krell fleet," the human spoke, the translation software rendering his harsh, guttural language perfectly. "This is Admiral Arthur Mitchell of the United Nations Space Command. You are currently trespassing in protected airspace. Power down your weapons, lower your shields, and prepare to be boarded. You have exactly 15 seconds to comply." Vorek's shock turned into burning rage. "You dare threaten the Krell Empire? You primitive block-building scavengers! I don't care where you came from. Your kinetic hulls will melt under our plasma. All ships retarget the newcomers. Fire!" The Krell dreadnoughts unleashed hell. Hundreds of massive, searing green plasma bolts lashed out, striking the black hulls of the human fleet. To the galaxy, Krell plasma was the ultimate weapon. It melted through energy shields and disintegrated alloy. But humanity didn't use energy shields. They used physics. The plasma splashed harmlessly against the Leviathan's ablative armor. The Raytheon-designed outer layers instantly vaporized, violently expanding outward and pushing the residual heat away from the hull. The thick tungsten beneath didn't even register a temperature spike. "Sir," Lieutenant Ford said calmly on the human bridge, "we've been hit. Paint was scratched on deck 4. Mitchell didn't smile. 15 seconds are up. Erase them." The human fleet didn't bother with glowing energy blasts. They used the oldest, most reliable method of killing in the universe, throwing rocks really, really fast. The Leviathan's spinal magnetic accelerator fired. The ship literally shuddered as immense electromagnets launched a 10-ton depleted uranium slug at 0.04% the speed of light. There was no sound in space, but the sheer kinetic energy of the round created a blinding flash of hard radiation. The Krell energy shield was designed to deflect energy, heat, and plasma. It was completely incapable of stopping 10 tons of solid mass moving at fractional light speed. The uranium slug punched through the Krell flagship's shield as if it were tissue paper. It struck the dreadnought dead center. The kinetic impact was so catastrophic that the Krell ship didn't just explode, it shattered. The physical shockwave ripped the crescent hull into a million pieces of twisting shrapnel, instantly vaporizing Vorek and his entire command crew in a blinding sphere of kinetic fire. Down on the planet's surface, Gideon gasped, falling to his knees. He watched as the invincible Krell flagship, the terror of the quadrant, was annihilated in less than a second by a single invisible strike, and then the rest of the human fleet opened fire. It was a slaughter. The human ships unleashed swarms of Lockheed Martin autonomous nuclear torpedoes. They didn't fly in straight lines. They moved erratically, dodging Krell point defense plasma with terrifying algorithmic precision. When they detonated, they didn't create standard explosions. They pumped raw nuclear energy into focused X-ray lasers, slicing through Krell escorts like hot knives through butter. Within 4 minutes, 80% of the Krell armada was reduced to a spiraling graveyard of burning wreckage. "Stop, stop!" a panicked Krell captain screamed over the open comms, his ship dead in the water, venting atmosphere. "We surrender! By the gods, we surrender!" "Cease fire," Mitchell ordered. The silence on the human bridge returned, professional and deadly. Ford, deploy the Marines. Secure their databanks. I want every star chart, every comms code, and every military outpost location the Krell possess. We're going to map their entire empire. Mitchell then turned to the secondary comms officer. Patch me through to the planet's surface. Gideon was shaking when the comms console in the bunker crackled to life. The face of the human admiral appeared. Up close, the Predator aesthetic was even more pronounced. The forward-facing eyes, the sheer mass of muscle beneath the uniform. Aethelgard Concordat, Mitchell said, his tone softening just a fraction, though still echoing with terrifying authority. I am Admiral Mitchell of Earth. We received your distress call. Apologies for the delay. We had a bit of a commute. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Gideon swallowed hard, his throat dry. You saved us. We sent a blind signal into the dark and you came. Who? What are you? We are humanity, Mitchell said simply, and we understand you're currently engaged in a war of extermination with these Krell. We were, Gideon corrected, looking at the tactical map that now showed the Krell fleet completely wiped out. We had no allies. We were alone. Mitchell leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the alien chancellors through the screen. You aren't alone anymore, Chancellor. We brought our fleets, our armies, and our manufacturing protocols. Earth stands with Aethelgard. The Admiral paused, glancing at the burning Krell wreckage outside his viewport. Now, where is their homeworld? The skies of Aethelgard, once choked with the toxic glowing ash of relentless Krell bombardments, began to violently clear. The sheer atmospheric displacement caused by the human dropships parting the clouds created localized hurricane-force winds. Chancellor Gideon stood on the shattered crystalline balcony of the Grand Citadel, tightly flanked by his surviving honor guard. They watched in absolute awe, mixed with a deep instinctual terror as the sky rained black iron. These were not the graceful, silent anti-gravity elevators of the Concordat, which hummed with polite harmonic frequencies. These were United Nations Space Command heavy landers, brutal, heavily armoured bricks propelled by roaring fusion thrusters that shook the very tectonic plates of the alien planet. They descended like falling meteors, deliberately waiting until the last possible microsecond to fire their retro rockets. The subsequent blast scorched the plaza courtyard, melting the decorative permacrete into glass as the immense ship slammed into the ground with earth-shattering thuds. The heavy hydraulic ramps hissed, venting thick clouds of white coolant vapor, and slammed down to form steel bridges. From the dark, cavernous bellies of the landers emerged the terrifying reality of the human war machine. First came the infantry. Legions of Marines clad in heavily modified General Dynamics exoskeleton combat suits marched in terrifying synchronized efficiency. They carried heavy magnetic acceleration rifles, their visors glowing with heads-up displays that mapped the alien city in real time. There was no hesitation in their step, no fear of the alien environment. They moved like an infection of absolute order spreading across a wounded organism. Following the infantry came the heavy armor, massive multi-treaded siege tanks and bipedal artillery walkers bearing the faded logos of Caterpillar, Rheinmetall and BAE Systems, ancient Terran corporations that had survived Earth's darkest centuries by building machines that simply refused to break under any planetary conditions. Chancellor Gideon flinched, his secondary respiratory gills fluttering in distress, as a towering figure broke off from the central infantry formation and marched purposefully toward the Citadel's broken steps. Admiral Arthur Mitchell had not remained safely in orbit. He wore a reinforced, vacuum-sealed tactical uniform, his chest adorned with the ribbons of a dozen ruthless pacification campaigns from the Sol system. As he reached the top of the stairs, he engaged the release valves on his collar, removing his pressurized helmet. Gideon saw the face of a true Deathworlder for the first time. The Admiral's skin was weathered, deeply scarred by decades of kinetic conflict, and his forward-facing eyes, cold, calculating, yet strangely weary, locked onto the alien leader. "Chancellor Gideon," Mitchell said. His voice carried a deep, gravelly resonance that the Concordat's translation matrix struggled to properly equalize, causing the speakers to emit a low, intimidating bass. He extended a heavily gauntleted hand. Gideon hesitated. He looked at the heavy appendage before awkwardly grasping it with his long, fragile, multi-jointed fingers. The sheer physical density of the human was startling. It was like shaking hands with a biological machine carved from solid neutronium. The casual gravity of Aethelgard barely seemed to register on the Admiral's heavy frame. "Admiral Mitchell," Gideon replied, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to maintain a statesman's composure. "You have delivered us from the abyss. On behalf of the Concordat, we owe you our civilization. We owe you the lives of billions. But I must confess that we did not anticipate a rescue operation to manifest in this particular form." Mitchell offered a grim, humorless smile that did not reach his eyes. "When you broadcast a blind, unencrypted distress call into the dark forest of the galaxy, Chancellor, you don't get to choose who hears it. You don't get to choose who answers. You're simply lucky we caught the signal before the predators finished their meal." Behind the Admiral, the logistics of human compassion were deploying with the same aggressive efficiency as their weaponry. Personnel bearing the ancient Red Cross insignia were establishing rapid deployment triage centres. They utilised advanced Northrop Grumman medical drones and Pfizer Novartis biosynthesizers, algorithms working overtime to adapt human coagulants and painkillers to Aethelgardian biology. Boston Dynamics automated loaders were already stacking crates of emergency rations and localized water purifiers. "Your people are suffering," Mitchell noted, his gaze sweeping over the burning skyline and the thousands of displaced, terrified civilians huddling in the lower courtyards. "My engineering battalions will deploy orbital HAB blocks by nightfall. We are bringing down heavy industrial fabricators to reconstruct your atmospheric processors. We will rebuild your defense grid from the bedrock up." "Why?" Commander Haxon asked, stepping out from behind the Chancellor. The alien commander's pale violet skin flushed a darker purple with a mixture of suspicion, exhaustion, and awe. "You do not know us. We have absolutely nothing to offer an empire of your magnitude. Our arts, our philosophy, our trade goods, they are useless to a military force like yours. Why expend such immense, incalculable resources on complete strangers?" Mitchell turned to Haxon, his expression hardening into a mask of pure tactical pragmatism. He gestured to a human officer, Major Harper, who stepped forward carrying a heavy hardened casing. "Because Earth remembers what it means to be pushed to the very edge of extinction," Mitchell said softly, though the menace in his tone was unmistakable. "And because the Creel made a critical, fatal tactical error. They were so arrogant, so confident in your destruction, that they broadcasted their military encryption keys on an open band while coordinating their planetary bombardment. Our cyber warfare AIs cracked their entire centralized network 20 minutes ago." Major Harper placed the casing onto the stone table in the center of the balcony and engaged the projector. A highly detailed, three-dimensional holographic map of the local galactic sector materialized, glowing in stark, unforgiving reds and blues. "The Krell weren't just exterminating your people for sport, Chancellor," Mitchell explained, pointing a thick finger at a glowing red anomaly 3 star systems away. "Your world sits directly on top of one of the galaxy's richest untapped deposits of naturally occurring hyperdense iridium. The Krell needed to harvest your planetary crust." "Needed it for what?" Gideon asked, a cold, creeping dread washing over him as he stared at the map. "To finish a weapon," Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Our intelligence division intercepted their black site engineering blueprints. The Krell are constructing a relativistic kill vehicle array, powered directly by the harnessed energy of a captive pulsar. A localized Death Star, if you will excuse the Terran cultural reference. Once completed, they plan to use the threat of localized supernovas to extort the galactic core. And, eventually, their scouts would have wandered into Sector 4. They would have turned their sensors toward Earth." Mitchell leaned heavily on the holographic table, his imposing shadow falling over the alien leaders. "Humanity does not tolerate existential threats in our backyard. We do not negotiate with genocidal empires. We do not appease tyrants, and we absolutely do not wait for the enemy to finish building their superweapons. You asked why we are here, Commander Haxon. We're here because saving your civilization gives us the perfect, morally justified staging ground. We need to rip the Krell Empire out of the cosmos by its roots. Gideon stared at the holographic projection of the Krell Forge world, the horrifying realization finally dawning on him. The humans hadn't just come as benevolent saviors descending from the heavens. They had come as the galaxy's ultimate apex predators, and the Krell, in their infinite arrogance, had foolishly rung the dinner bell. 48 hours later, Aethelgard had been transformed. The pacifist world had become the heavily fortified forward operating base of the United Nations Space Command. Anti-orbital railgun batteries now dotted the rolling hillsides, and the sky was constantly illuminated by the contrails of human interceptors running combat patrols. But the true storm was gathering in high orbit. The UNSC Leviathan sat at the centre of the Armada, its nuclear furnaces burning with the intensity of a captured star. They had assimilated the Krell navigational data. They knew exactly where the Krell Forge world, the heart of their military-industrial complex and the site of their pulsar weapon, was located. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Mitchell stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Beside him stood an unlikely guest, Commander Haxon of the Concordat, brought aboard as a localized navigational consultant. Haxon looked incredibly out of place among the stark, dimly lit steel corridors and the silent, hyper-focused human crew. "Slipspace coordinates locked, Admiral," Lieutenant Ford reported, his fingers flying across the terminal. "The Krell Forge world, designated Taurus Prime, is heavily fortified. They have gathered their remaining fleets. Scanners indicate roughly 800 hostile contacts in orbit. They know we are coming." "Good," Mitchell said coldly. "I want them to see us. I want the entire galaxy to watch." "Admiral," Haxon interjected nervously, his violet skin paling to a light lavender. 800 ships. Even with your kinetic weaponry, the sheer volume of their plasma fire could overwhelm your armor. It is a suicide run." "Commander Haxon," Mitchell said, not breaking his gaze from the viewport. "Humanity learned a long time ago that in a war of annihilation, you don't fight fair. You don't fight with honor. You fight with physics. Lieutenant Ford, initiate Operation Hellfire. Jump." The fabric of space tore open, and the human armada plunged into the slipspace rupture. They did not arrive at the edge of the Taurus Prime system to engage in a traditional, honorable naval battle. They did not decelerate to offer terms of surrender. Instead, the human fleet translated out of slipspace directly inside the Krell defensive formation. The Krell commanders, arrogant and expecting a frontal assault, were completely blinded as 300 massive black monoliths materialized right on top of them. The spatial displacement alone shattered the hulls of dozens of Krell destroyers, tearing them apart before a single shot was fired. "Fire at will," Mitchell ordered. It was a point-blank execution. The human dreadnoughts unleashed broadsides of depleted uranium slugs, tearing through the Krell armada like buckshot through a flock of birds. The elegant, symmetrical Krell ships were designed for long-range energy duels, not close-quarters kinetic brawling. Their shields simply overloaded and collapsed under the physical mass of the Terran onslaught. But the true devastation was yet to come. "Target the pulsar containment ring," Mitchell ordered, his voice echoing in the chaotic symphony of the bridge. "Load the Shiva-class ordnance." Deep within the bowels of the Leviathan, automated loaders hoisted a massive cylindrical payload into the primary mass accelerator. It was a weapon banned during the Terran Unification Wars, a planet cracker designed by the darkest minds of the Boeing Aerospace Division. It didn't rely on explosions, it relied on gravity, firing solution locked, magnetic coils at maximum yield. "Fire!" The Leviathan bucked violently. A streak of absolute darkness shot from the prow of the ship, cutting through the void at a fraction of light speed. It bypassed the chaotic naval battle entirely, slipping past the shattered Krell defenders and striking the massive, incomplete metallic ring surrounding the captive pulsar. The impact was silent, but the visual was apocalyptic. The Shiva warhead detonated, releasing a localized artificial gravity well. It disrupted the magnetic containment field holding the volatile pulsar stable. For a single, terrifying microsecond, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, the pulsar ruptured. A wave of blinding, incandescent stellar fire erupted outward. It washed over the Krell shipyards, instantly vaporizing the orbital scaffolding, the defense platforms, and the remaining Krell fleet. The immense heat sheared the atmosphere right off of Terrace Prime, turning the heavily industrialized Forge world into a barren, glowing cinder of glass and molten rock. The human fleet had already initiated an emergency slipspace jump, jumping backward just far enough to let the stellar shockwave dissipate against their heavy ablative armor. When the light faded, there was nothing left of the Krell military apparatus. The heart of their empire had been surgically removed, cauterized by the very star they had tried to weaponize. Commander Haxon collapsed into one of the bridge jump seats, his hands covering his face in absolute horror and awe. By the Maker, you extinguished a star system in an instant. We extinguished a threat, Mitchell corrected, stepping down from the command podium. He turned to the main communications console. Open a wideband transmission, unencrypted. Send this to the galactic core, to the Krell homeworld, and to every listening post within 10,000 light years. The red recording light flickered on. Mitchell stared into the lens, his face an unmoving mask of absolute resolve. This is Admiral Arthur Mitchell of the United Nations Space Command. Let this broadcast serve as the official declaration of the Soul Doctrine. For centuries, humanity remained in the dark, watching the stars, waiting for a sign of civilized life. Instead, we found predators. We found the Krell. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. The Krell Empire's military capability has been permanently dismantled. Any further acts of aggression against the Aethelgardian Concordat, or any other peaceful species in this sector, will be considered an act of war against Earth. We do not conquer, we do not enslave. But if you bring fire to the innocent, we will bring the void to your doorstep. Sector 4 is now under Terran protection. Stay out of our territory. Mitchell cut the feed. The message would take hours to reach the core, but when it did, it would fundamentally alter the geopolitical landscape of the galaxy forever. The predators of the cosmos had ruled unchallenged for millennia. They had built their empires on the bones of the weak. But as the UNSC Leviathan turned its massive, scarred hull back toward Aethelgard, the galaxy learned a terrifying new truth. There was always a bigger predator, and this one had just woken up. Aethelgard survived. Under the heavy, iron-fisted protection of the human military-industrial complex, they flourished. They became the diplomatic bridge between the terrifying Deathworlders of Earth and the rest of the civilized galaxy. Chancellor Gideon would go down in history not as the leader who surrendered, but as the leader who had the courage to scream into the dark. And humanity? They took their rightful place among the stars, not as diplomats, not as traders, but as the silent, armored guardians of the night, ensuring that no species would ever have to die simply because they were too peaceful to fight back. If you enjoyed this HFY Sci-Fi story of humanity stepping up to protect the galaxy, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this epic tale with your friends who love massive space battles, unbreakable human resolve, and pure science fiction drama. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming deep space adventures and HFY narratives. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.